welcome back to another episode of Kavanaugh's Corner. I'm Andrew Kavanaugh. Thank you for coming back to us. I know I'm looking again like I'm dressed up like Don Johnson, and I think it's like the second or third time I've been looking like this, but it's for a good reason. Recently I was talking to somebody that I work with, and they mentioned something about Miami Vice, and it kind of led to kind of a really large discussion about how people still love this show, even though none of us were even around when this show originally aired. But it still somehow has a big effect on pop culture, and just people in general seem to really enjoy that show. And it kind of led me back to, when I first watched the show, when it came out on DVD, I think in like 2003, and I'd always wanted to see it. So I ended up buying the DVD sets and everything, and I ended up becoming like an instant fan of the show. I really love that show. And so, at Kavanaugh's Corner now, we're going to be doing a 6-part series on Miami Vice, where every part, I'm going to do one part for each season, and also a extra part at the end where I'm going to be looking at the movie with Jamie Foxx and Colin Farrell. It came out a few years back. I'm doing this because I love this show, and honestly, you don't see too many videos about it, so I'm going to do that, do my little review of each season in the movie. And actually, I have it right here. I have the box set that came out not too long ago, actually. Funny enough, you can't even buy this anymore, which is too bad, but I love this show, so I wanted to get it. And one other thing I wanted to mention is, this is a show that really deserves to be on Blu-ray, and it is not. I guess maybe Universal doesn't even own the rights to it anymore, the home video rights. So hopefully within the next couple of years we'll get a high-definition version of the show, because I guess you can kind of watch it in HD on Hulu right now, but I do not have Hulu Plus, so I've been watching the DVDs. I went back and rewatched most of the show, and again, I'm going to be doing a video every week, one video for the next 6 weeks. Each week, one video on the influence and my take on each season of Miami Vice. So today I'm going to be doing the first season, which is, obviously it's a pretty big season of the show. It's the premiere. The nice thing that's funny about Miami Vice is it only really takes a few episodes before it starts to hit its stride, and it knows kind of its strengths and weaknesses. The first season of Miami Vice is one of the best first seasons of any show I've ever seen. The pilot is one of the best pilots of all time. It's also subtitled Brother's Keeper, which makes sense once you see it. Again, I'm not going to spoil many stories or anything of any episode of the entire show. I'm going to be talking very kind of lightly about it. I will be mildly spoiling some things, but if I do, I will mention beforehand. The pacing of the pilot is one of the weakest things I think about it. The style is not really quite there yet, and I think also it's mainly a revenge kind of drug bust story, which is, pretty much every episode of Miami Vice for the most part, or at least for the first 2 seasons. They mainly focused on drugs. The pilot kind of introduces us to the Miami Vice squad as a whole, and also Rico Tubbs, who is not really quite a cop per se in the first episode. He is an NYPD officer, doesn't quite work in Florida yet, but Sonny Crockett is introduced to us. He's kind of a playboy cop living on the edge. He actually is an ex-football player, which I think is kind of an interesting story. And it's actually a really interesting take on a cop character. Until this point in time, many cop characters were very hard-nosed, older people. They were older men and women. Actually, very rarely did you see women at this point, but every now and then you'd see women. And I think it's great that this show basically mixed races, was very highly stylized, and also had a ton of great music, and that's something you get right from the pilot. Funny enough, Anthony Yerkovich, who is the guy that created the pilot, the first show, and then gets creative credit for the rest of the run of the show, him and Michael Mann really had the idea of doing what they called MTV Cops, which is the best way to surmise the show, really, where these two cops are extremely cool. They're not the norm, and in that case, it makes it kind of entertaining for these guys to watch. The pilot is basically, the main story is Rico's brother gets killed, who is ironically also an NYPD cop. And he travels to Florida to go after a drug lord who also Sonny Crockett and his team are following. And I gotta say, it's actually, like I said, it's a pretty well done pilot. I think it's 2 hours. I think it's around 2 hours, but it's really well made. The quality is very high, especially for a cop show in the 80s. The quality is very, very high. It's actually filmic, and you really do feel like most of the time you're watching Miami Vice, you really do feel like you're watching a movie, which is great. I think that's why the budgets were so incredibly high for that show. At the time, Miami Vice had the highest budget of any TV show that has ever been made, and actually as the show went on, they only got higher and higher, I should say. The chemistry between the actors in the show is always amazing. Don Johnson as Sonny Crockett, his character actually develops as the show goes on, and I'll be talking about that. Things change with his character over time, and it's interesting to watch it. Same with Tubbs. Tubbs is more or less a more stagnant character, but again, it's nice to see him go through emotional changes as well with Crockett. And of course, you have Trudy and the other officers all do a great job. Of course, the other officers, Zito, and I'm trying to think of the other actor's name, Larry Zito, and I think Switek is the other character, who mainly do surveillance. They kind of get more stories as the show goes on, but the first season they're kind of kept to a minimal role, but they're still part of the team and they do a great job. Edward James Olmos as the captain, as Castillo, is one of the most interesting characters. He is the hardest character on the show. He's been through some pretty incredible stuff. Him and the other cops have a kind of an unsaid kind of camaraderie, but there's also a lot of episodes where Castillo clashes with the other cops, and it's interesting to have that great balance, and the show does have a really good balance where there are episodes where they don't get along, and there are episodes where they're working together as a great team. And it's nice to go back and forth with that, because a lot of shows in the 80s, the captain was kind of the enemy, and it's nice to see them go back and forth, which is cool. It's a great little great cast they have on that show. The other thing that's awesome about Miami Vice is, like I said earlier, is that the action is really spectacular. There are some really intense shootouts all throughout the show, through the whole 5 seasons. They did a great job with action. Funny enough, some of the actual weapons that are used on the show, especially for the first 2 seasons, Sonny Crockett had a pistol called a Bren 10, which is a 10mm handgun. And if anybody knows anything that's watching this video and they know anything about handguns, that's like an extremely ridiculously powerful handgun. And actually now it's a collector's item. And that actually, I think, is actually in some sort of museum somewhere now. The actual gun he had on the show is actually in like a glass case now, which is really amazing. Overall, I mean, the first scenes of the show really kind of set the tone for what the rest of the show would be. Of course, as the seasons go on, I'm going to talk about changes that happen on the show, because the show did go through many kind of iterations, as I'll talk about. Not all of them good. But like I said, it really takes up 2 or 3 episodes for the show to catch on, and after that, it's just smooth. And it's a great first season. Like I said, as a whole, it's amazing. The one thing I thought that was really amazing about the show that I wanted to talk about is that, as a whole, if you talk to somebody that was around for when the show first premiered, I've asked maybe 15, 20 people that were actually alive and well during the time of the show being on. And funny enough, the influence of the show is so strong that I guarantee you, if you ask anybody, they will say the show was on for many, many years, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. The show was only on for 5 years, and for a show that was only on for 5 seasons, it had an unbelievable impact on television, just cop shows in general, even like pop culture. I mean, the way these guys dressed and the way the women dressed on this show is the way people dressed for many years afterwards. It was a very, I hate to use the word hip, but it was the hip style of the time. And strangely, I'm seeing it come back now, which is kind of frightening, but in a way, I don't mind it. I kind of like it. But it's one of those things where I asked, like I said, I asked 15 to 20 people, and literally, I can't make this up, almost 80-90% of the people I asked all said the show was on for 10 plus years. It was on from 1984 to 1989. That's it. That was it. So this show definitely resonated with people to the point where they thought it was on long after it was over. And it really wasn't. Maybe it was reruns. I don't know. But I want to talk about some of the episodes I think are really great in the first season. I have them written down here, so don't mind me. Heart of Darkness is that's a great episode. Evan is another one. Another episode called No Exit, which actually stars Bruce Willis in one of his first roles ever. So that's interesting to see. He's actually the bad guy in that episode. It's interesting enough. Smuggler's Blues, another great episode with starring and having music from Glenn Frey, who has since passed away recently. A great episode. And then there's another one, a very dark episode called The Home Invaders, which I really like. It's probably the darkest episode of the season, and it is a great episode. Very much shades of Manhunter in that episode, which Michael Mann would later actually leave Miami Vice to do. But we'll talk about more of that in the third season episode, which is going to be coming soon, so stay tuned. Other than that, I give the first season of Miami Vice I give it my highest recommendation. If you can find the series on DVD, I say definitely buy the first season, see if you like it. If you do, come back for my review of the second season, which is coming next week. So until then, thank you for coming back to Kavanaugh's Corner, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.